Welcome back. I'm Heather Kreider from the College Planning Consultants team. This is video 2 of a 3-part video series. Now in the first video, we went over some of the overview of the planning process. We showed some top 10 lists of careers and salaries and just kind of a basic myths and understanding of financial aid. Now in this video, we're going to go a little bit deeper into financial aid, really understand the FAFSA form, and the common terminology that surrounds it. Will also show you the estimated family contribution, some calculations, and why that's so important. Now, just like in the first video, a lot of people really want to understand the details surrounding these calculations and these processes. If you're one of those people, then keep watching this video. Now, some people just want help and just want to go straight to how they can save money for their specific situation without really having to learn and go too much into the detail. And that's what we're here for. We are offering a free one-on-one consultation. You can skip this video and hit the link below and apply for the free consultation, and we can go directly into your situation and try to help you come up with a plan. Hey everyone, this is Heather Kreider back with you from the College Planning Consultants team, and welcome to video 2 of the 3-part video series on college planning basics and now the purple elephant we call financial aid. Now in the first video, we went over the basic layout of a plan and why it's so important. We pretty much figured out that we can't assume anything and need a well-devised plan to get the most out of our money and to uncover as many strategies as possible for any income bracket to make the most of college planning. We also went over the basic questions to review when looking at the college and how to put things in your favor to get help in getting the best financial aid available and how to get your application on top of that admissions counselor's stack. Now in this video, we are going to get into the real meat and potatoes of financial aid. So jumping right into it, what we're going to bring to you is what we call financial aid declassified. That's our little attempt at being clever and a way of saying that the best financial aid tips sometimes are hidden. Maybe not so much hidden, but they're very hard to find. Let's face it, financial aid officers do an amazing job at what they do, and no disrespect to them or high school guidance counselors. However, they're pretty overworked and aren't able to help every student really research and get every option in detail that they really should. So, good news for you, you're taking the time to watch this video series and that it was sent to you so you can get a bit more leg up on these tips. Step 1 is the approach file. When approaching college, perhaps some parents are so thrilled to get them out of the house, or they're just astonished that they actually survived and graduated high school or going to be graduating high school, that they'll pay whatever it takes to send them to college. Now, I'm not here to judge, and I'm sure my parents threw a heck of a party when I left for college. They were just elated to have their house back. Regardless of your current financial position, one of the first things you will need to have with your student is perhaps the dreaded "let's talk about the cost of college" discussion. The basic premise of this discussion, for our purposes here today, are the known costs of college, such as books, tuition, housing, and food, and the immediate survival cost. The other cost of, well, let's just say college living expenses, is perhaps another topic you can cover with your student at a later time. Now, the truth is, you first need to have that basic idea in mind of who is assuming financial burden of attending college. Are you covering just the cost of books and tuition, or all the fees, including housing and food, etc.? Or are you going to cover all the costs that's not obtained through the traditional financial aid processes? So really the question is, what approach will you take when covering the cost? Now, the typical approach to paying for college, I'm not saying this is you, but typically parents and students consist of how much do we have and then we spend it? Where can we get more money? Perhaps we'll borrow it. Is there any room in the budget? If there's even a little bit of room, we'll squeeze every drop we can out to be able to cover those costs. Or by the time most parents get to that point, they say, can we get financial aid? Once they go through the process of even thinking about it, they usually throw up their hands and say, we give up. If you've been through this yourself or with another child, you might relate. But why do most people give up when they get to that last financial aid part? Sometimes it might seem impossible. You may think you don't qualify, or you assume you will not get any financial aid, or all the terms and forms are so confusing you just want to burn them. And trust me, I've been there myself. But the good news is you do have a choice, and that's called the SMART approach. And since you're hanging out here and watching this video, you've obviously made the smart choice and want to make the most that you can out of the entire college planning process, and obviously saving as much money as possible. So the SMART approach is as easy as A, applying for financial aid, B, becoming cash flow efficient. Now later in this series, we'll show you really what that means and a few things you can do in your strategy to help the efficiency of cash flow. C, your credit. Determine your true borrowing sources, not just tapping out and borrowing anything that you can. And then D, being deplete the assets appropriately. The key to the SMART approach really is just to have a plan and to be able to plan ahead a bit. Just like any major event, waiting into the last minute usually doesn't pay off. There's not much additional time or availability of resources when we wait to the last minute. Financial aid really is not that tricky. You just have to apply and know enough about the system to get everything you possibly can. Now, later we will show you more of the financial aid process and what can be utilized and to better understand some of those efficient methods. Before we can fully go through that process of financial aid, first let's talk about the myths and the myth file. Myths can usually be pretty costly assumptions in financial aid, but assumptions usually are pretty costly in everything. Nonetheless, the whole point, which is getting the best education as possible while saving as much as possible on these costs. The myths include, we make too much money. Later we'll show you what you can do if you think you make too much money to increase your chances of still getting financial aid. The second myth, our child's grades are too low. Definitely a myth. This is precisely why they have the ACT and SAT, to standardize everyone a little bit more. Some students just don't do well in school but are extremely bright and do very well on tests. Next myth is our home is worth too much. Again, we'll show you later what you can do to increase your chances of getting financial aid if you think you fall in that category. We will qualify for aid due to our debt load. Maybe, maybe not. That depends on how the numbers really play out. Getting financial aid is easy. Well, sometimes even a NASA scientist who's used to cracking codes even struggle a bit to get through the ins and outs of all the tricks to financial aid. Actually, it's not that hard. It's just a matter of going through the process and starting it early enough. Another myth that usually falls is my student will get more aid if they are independent. The current rules are, in order for a student to become independent, they must be 24, or have children, or married, or a veteran, a ward of estate, or have already completed their undergraduate coursework and are currently working on an advanced or postgraduate degree. And the final myth we are going to go over today is that private schools are out of the question and too expensive. Now, what would you think if I told you private schools could actually in some ways work out to be less expensive than others? Now, we really don't know this for sure until we do true comparisons of schools, but the point is, it's a myth that they're always more expensive. There's a lot more that goes into it than just the pure cost. Again, hang in there with us and we'll do comparisons and show that point later on. So now, let's take a minute to crack the old terminology code and to understand a little bit more the FA terminology, or otherwise known as the financial aid terminology. Now, just like most organizations, they love to have their own acronyms. It's like an acronym club, I guess, if you will. COA, EFC, FAFASA, FAD, FAO, FSEOG, SAR, GSL, PLUS. ABC, 1, 2, 3, FCC, I don't know. There's so many terms. Sometimes it definitely feels like a foreign language. So let's learn the most important, the ones that are most common, I guess. COA is the cost of attendance. EFC is expected family contribution. FAFSA, otherwise known as FAFSA, is the free application for federal student aid. FAD is a financial aid director, or FAO, financial aid officer, FCEOG, Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Then we have the student aid report. GSL is the guaranteed Stafford loan, and then finally we come up with the parent loan for undergraduate student. Then we have some of the financial aid terms, which are asset allowance, award package, federal methodology, base year, expected need, and the profile form. Now, you don't need to worry about memorizing the acronyms or terms, but I did want to at least show you what they are. They will come up definitely more than others, but just to have a general overview of some of the more common terms. Now, I know I did go over those pretty quickly, and your head might be spinning by now, or perhaps just a little bored. But hang on, because now we need to go over the two most important terms and get into the detail of some of the facts that you really need to understand. The first being the FAFSA, otherwise known as Free Application for Federal Student Aid. This is the form. It is the one that determines the student's eligibility for financial aid. There's no cost to complete it. However, you might want to make sure it's as accurate as possible. There's certain qualified professionals that can assist you. If you do use someone to help you complete it, please make sure they have had special training in college planning and the federal aid process. I used to be a corporate accountant many years ago, and just because I did at the time, it did not qualify me for college aid planning. At that time, I had no idea of the real details and the rules surrounding it. So I'm just suggesting that if you do use someone, and there are people that can help complete the FAFSA, just make sure that they do understand the terminology. Now, surrounding the myth that you won't qualify leads to approximately 8 million people who fail to file every year. Now, that may or may not mean that they would qualify if they had, but chances are they would have qualified or been able to receive some sort of aid. Now, when should you submit the form? Beginning January 1st of each year. Now, something important to keep in mind, schools do require a 30% audit. This could be a high or low number depending upon how you look at auditing, but the responsibility and pressure is on you to make sure that the formulas and figures are accurate. It's been known that 70% of the FAFSAs that are completed do contain errors. That's a pretty big number, and it's a pretty costly number for you and your pocketbook and your future debt load of your student. So again, very important to make sure that this form is not only completed, but completed accurately. You can go to the old Google and download a PDF of the form at www.federalstudentaid.ed.gov. You can also call 1-800-4-FED-AID. That's the number directly. It's set up there to help you complete and answer questions regarding the FAFSA form. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't call, because I think any help you can get would be better, but just keep in mind that that is a federal line, and sometimes you get what you get. So at this point, some people still believe the myth that they shouldn't even bother completing that FAFSA form. So let's talk about that for just a second and show you really why it's important to complete this form. Now, the federal government created the Federal Aid for College program to assist with college education. Now, it puts a label on what is called financial need. The FAFSA is the form that standardizes to determine the qualifying need. So this calculation is the cost of attendance. The cost of attendance comes from the Department of Education, and basically it averages 4,000 schools across the nation. Although each school has its own cost of attendance, may or may not be higher than what the average is, but that's what's used as the cost of attendance. Now, included in the true cost of attendance is tuition, room and board, living expenses, and transportation. Now, again, the college incidentals are left out for our purposes here, but you and your student should perhaps consider what incidentals they might actually have. So the formula is the cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution. Now, expected family contribution is by the nature of the size of the family, the age of the parents, number in college both the students and the parents' assets, as well as the parents and the students' income. That's all included in the expected family contribution. This basically is the amount of money that is assumed a family can afford to assist with paying for college. The main difference is the need, and it determines the maximum amount of aid that a family may receive. Now, two key things I wanted to point out that I tried to accent here. Number one being the assumption. Just because expected family contribution is what the calculation is, it doesn't mean it's actually what you are affording. Expected family contribution also doesn't mean what you had intended on paying. The calculation is what it is. Now also keep in mind what you may qualify for. The key to understand here, and I'll show you later when we really get into the comparisons of schools, but each school will have a different amount that's covering this need. Each school is a different cost. Each school will also have a different calculation and formula to be able to help with what they consider the gift aid. So picking a school is probably the first important decision. You have to work hand in hand with not only the amount of need that you have based upon the calculations, but also in the cost of the school. So you might be able to tell at this point that the EFC might be the single most important calculation that most also get very wrong. You should realize that the first calculation you complete, meaning the first time you complete it, it's not the exact calculation. Once you complete it once, it just gives you a first baseline of where you start at. Then there are things you can do later to help the calculation to be able to get more need. If you're following along, and I haven't lost you too much in the technical goobly-gaw at this point yet, then what you realize is the amount of aid that you receive is based upon the calculation in the FAFSA and the actual financial need. So let's take a few minutes now and go over just an overview of the expected family contribution, or at least the calculation of it and what goes inside of it. Now, the first is the parent's contribution, or what's perceived via the calculation of the parent's contribution. Included in that is the income adjusted for taxes. Then we have discretionary assets. Basically, that's pretty much everything. Assets, mutual funds, CDs, stocks, bonds, property, money markets, vacation homes, grandparents, even contributions, stock options, cookie jars, monies, anything of that nature, including the child's assets as well. Then also, as a part of that EFC calculation, is definitely the student's contribution as well. Again, the adjusted income, adjusted for taxes, and any asset that the student may own. The other factors that come into play with the allocation are the number in a college. That makes a big impact if you have more than one student in college at one point in time. Also, the number in the household. If there's only one student in college at one time, but then there's 3 other children in the household, that also makes an impact. Then the parent's age. Parents' age come into play with that calculation as well. And don't forget that the school selection is very important in this overall calculation. Now, even after going through the FAFSA and the expected family contribution, if you still feel that there's no way you're going to qualify for need-based financial aid, that does not mean it's the end of the road for you. There's still a few strategies that might be able to help you. We will go over that in the next video. Now, so far we have gone over a lot in this video. We've covered what we consider a better or smart approach. We've gone through the terms and the myths and the FAFSA and why and how it is so important to calculate it accurately, and gone over the basics of the expected family contribution. Now, up in the next video, we will look at the strategies to help uncover additional cash flow and tax strategies to help with the cost of college. In addition, we will compare the details of colleges and really look at which are the best in giving an aid and how to be able for you to compare those yourself. Also, we will review why and how not to count out private colleges. So thanks for hanging in there with me, and stay tuned for the next video.